Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Corlick from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today I got a package that we're going to go ahead and open up and talk all about. Before we do that though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, and subscribe if you've never done that before. I appreciate the support. In addition to that, if you guys could check me out in the social media stuff, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, as well as my brand new travel channel called Flying and Eating with, or Adam Eats the World, which is an adventure channel where I go to all these places all the time. Like I just got back from Kansas City, so there'll be a video on that, where I was at a convention and all that sort of stuff, and you can see about how a lot of these things come to even be here in the first place, as well as just oddities and things you might be curious about the world. For example, a long series in Japan. I think you guys might enjoy it. Now, thank you very much for that. So, yes, back to this. This is a package from Retro Fighters. Now, full disclosure, Retro Fighters sent this to me for free for the purposes of review, and in true Retro Fighters fashion, they did not tell me about this beforehand. It just showed up. So I actually had to Google this and be like, what did they release now? Oh, this actually sounds kind of neat. So let's go ahead and open it up and talk about it. Now, if you have never heard of Retro Fighters before, shame on you, because I've done a bunch of videos on their stuff, which means you haven't been watching, man. That's why I said you got to subscribe. Maybe even hit that bell, because everybody loves to say that one. I think, actually, in the 14 years I have been on YouTube, that might be the first time I've ever said hit that bell. I don't know, because it's kind of annoying. But anyways, yes, we'll cut through here. They basically took 3 different packages and kind of taped them all together. But yeah, so Retro Fighters is a company that makes controllers, specifically for a bunch of retro consoles. And then, you know, we basically, over time, our tastes in controllers have evolved. You know, we've gotten into the more ergonomic design instead of so much of our traditional retro designs. Personally, I like both, but, you know, I'm not going to lie, since I've done a bunch of videos on these things, I've kind of been like, you know what, I see why they made this. It's pretty good. For example, this is the Retro Fighters Brawler 64, the wireless edition. This is actually for an original Nintendo 64 console. This one had USB-C charging. It was wireless. The only real big flaw of it is that it couldn't support the rumble functionality because it was wireless. That doesn't matter right now. What we're going to do here is take a look at these things. These are their newest thing, which we have to still get into. Thank you for bearing with me. This last one was a pain. Anyway, so I got them all out here now, so toss that to the side. And then we've got this one here, which we'll take out right there. Toss that to the side, and this one was already out, and so toss that to the side, and then there's this little fragment that you're just going to sit there and make the shot look bad. Anyway, so yes, we have 3 controllers here. The Brawler 64 wireless gamepad specifically for the Nintendo Switch, which we will elaborate on in a minute. So yeah, obviously I haven't used these yet. You just saw me open them, sort of. But anyway, yeah, so we've got 3 different colors. We have the original grayscale Nintendo 64 design, which is the same as this one, essentially, but different in as far as functionality goes. The color tone is, of course, meant to match the original Nintendo 64 release. We also have this blue one, which I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think this is sort of based on, in Japan, there was a blue edition of the console, I think called like Ocean Spray or something like that. I think this might be based on that, although there might also be a Funtastic edition blue one. I'm not super familiar with all the variants of the N64, but regardless, it's like a blue controller. And the last one that I think is actually kind of the most interesting is they have this all-white one that almost looks like a prototype or something. Or maybe something like, you know, if Apple designed a controller for this thing. I don't really know. So for our purposes, we're just going to open one and talk about it. I think because I already have the grayscale original design over here, we'll just go ahead and focus on that one and just kind of leave these up as eye candy. So when we open, well, actually, but let's take a look at the box and let's talk about it a little bit first. So Brawler 64 wireless gamepad. It features next generation, well, it's a next generation N64 controller. It has Bluetooth wireless technology. It's compatible with Switch and PC, and we'll elaborate on the Switch in a second. Although I guess they're already putting that on the box, which makes sense. Specifically made for Nintendo Switch Online. We'll come back around to that. It features a swapping feature, so it can swap between Nintendo Switch Online and the Pro layout, which we'll also elaborate on. It features responsive analog sticks and a wireless range of over 30 feet. I do know that this one supports the rumble functionality, which is pretty cool. But yeah, so if you're like kind of like, okay, what's going on with this thing? This controller by Retro Fighters is intended for the Nintendo Switch, and as a bonus feature works on PC. It might work on some other things, but officially that's all they claim to support, which is fine. But when it comes to the Switch, where this is interesting is this is not yet just another Pro controller or third-party Pro controller as recognized by the Switch. This one is actually specifically intended for the Nintendo Switch Online N64 mode. So, for those who don't know, Nintendo's Switch has this online functionality where if you subscribe to a service, you can actually get access to a relatively big library of Nintendo 64 games, as well as other things like N64 or SNES, NES, Sega Genesis, etc. And once you download essentially their emulator, their legit software, there's a whole bunch of games that go with that they've already pre-approved of. The most interesting one being in there is the English translated version of Sin and Punishment, which is a great Japanese exclusive that we never got, but it's in English on there, so that's pretty cool. Now, this controller is actually meant specifically for that. In fact, Nintendo themselves saw this as valuable because they released their own N64 controller specifically for the Nintendo Switch Online software. So for anybody out there who looked at the N64 and said, I really like this game console, but I want a more up-to-date controller, Retro Fighters had you covered with this. However, if you're that exact same mentality, but you're like, I don't actually want to play on an N64. I have a Nintendo Switch and I subscribe to Nintendo Switch Online, but I want my N64 retro fix. But at the same time, I don't like Nintendo's official controller for it, and the Pro controller or whatever third-party controller you're using leaves something to be desired. If you fall into that specific niche, this is made for you. So let's go ahead and take a look at it, open it up. Yep. So inside, well, that's just a box, and we have the white box here. You can get into it a few different ways. We'll open it up from this side. So inside there, you get the controller. You have a few different little pieces of paper and a single cable. So the first thing is a warning that basically says, charge this for a minimum of 2 hours. So obviously we're going to go play it and charge it before I give you final thoughts, but there's a thing about that specifically. There's also a little quick start manual that basically tells you about how to pair the device, how to change different modes. So here's the thing, as I mentioned, this can function as both a Pro controller and as an N64 controller as far as the Switch is concerned. Within the system settings, you can adjust that, and there will even be a little icon that changes accordingly from Pro controller to N64 controller. The basic difference between the two is just the button mapping is a little bit different. If you're going to actually use it for its intended function of Nintendo Switch Online, you're going to want it running in N64 mode just so the buttons are the most accurate. But yeah, then it just has indicators about like what light patterns indicate which if the controller's in port 1, port 2, whatever it thinks it is. A few FAQs about charging it, how long the battery life is, which it claims about 10 hours. And what else it works on, and how to connect it, etc. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff there, and there's also social media things to follow Retro Fighters. It includes a USB-C controller, which is actually labeled and branded now as Retro Fighters, which is cool, and then the controller itself, which is pretty similar by design to their previous Brawler 64. But again, this one is specifically intended for actual Nintendo 64 hardware. This one is designed for the Switch. And there are a few differences accordingly. So the original N64 version only has a single light on it, a single LED, because it can't pretend to be 4 different controllers at once, whereas this one theoretically could because it's entirely digital. So it has 4 LEDs on it. On the top buttons on the actual 64 console are for turbo and clear functionality, whereas on this controller they are the minus symbol for the Switch as well as the home button. And then there's 2 additional buttons that only exist on the Switch version. One is the swap button, so that way it can go between being a Pro controller and being an N64 controller as far as the Switch sees it. This one's also heavier, and as I recall, it's just because of the rumble functionality being in it. Okay guys, I've been using this thing for a while now, and it's time for final thoughts. As you can see, I've got a monitor set up here, and I'm going to show you guys some of the basic stuff. The TLDW, I guess, although you obviously did watch, is the thing is pretty good. It's exactly what I would have expected out of Retro Fighters. Like, again, this is their N64 one, and it was just an improvement on the N64 controller. This is exactly the same thing, you know, except, of course, for the Switch, as mentioned before. So there's a couple of things I want to go over. First, the pairing process. I was having a little bit of trouble with this, but then once I got past the initial hurdle, everything seemed fine. One thing to keep in mind down here where it says Pro Controller wired communication, this has to be off. Once that's off, what you're of course going to want to do is go to the change grip order screen, and then this screen will pop up. So from there is a binding button on the bottom of the controller, and you're going to want to hold that down for at least 3 seconds until it kind of connects. From there, once it connects, you'll have a couple of options. So right now the controller is in Nintendo 64 mode. So if I go ahead and tell it to start up here, it'll start looking, and then it will find it, and then on the screen it represents itself as a Nintendo 64 controller. But as I mentioned, there is this other button down here if you're on the back of the controllers to swap it. If you press this, it will switch into Pro Switch controller mode, and as you can see, that pops up on the screen as well. So you can switch between the two. Now that has certain advantages, particularly with navigating, around the menu is a little bit easier when it's in Pro controller mode, etc. But when you're specifically using this for the N64 mode, obviously you want it in that mode, so make sure you press that, and then once again it'll switch over, and then you can play accordingly. Now you can actually press that button kind of whenever you want. It doesn't have to be on the screen. Once the controller is attached, it'll work just fine, and then you can swap around and do whatever you want. So we have the N64, essentially emulator software built in here. I want to give a huge shout out, by the way. I don't subscribe to this service. My buddy Gary Katzer, aka Rock Solid Gaming, he's another retro gaming YouTuber. I'll put a link in the description to his channel. You should check him out. He was cool enough to basically add me to his family plan just so we could make this video. So huge shout out to him, and a huge shout out to Retro Fighters, because the two of them came together for me to be able to make this video for you. So if you go ahead and run that software, I'll log in as myself, as my associated account, and yeah, no big deal. Once we're inside, I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with the software. I'm not really going to teach you anything new there, but they have various N64 games, and then you can kind of click on whatever you want and then run it from there. Because I'm a little concerned about Nintendo coming after me for showing their games, because they're the one company that really hates when you celebrate their history. We're not going to do that. However, I did play a bunch. I played a lot of Mario Kart 64 because that's a game I know extremely well, so I was going to see if there was any sort of noticeable issues, and again, no, it played very accurately, very comfortably, again within the understanding that you're playing with the Retro Fighters controller, not the original N64 controller. The same logic would apply to the actual N64 one. Like, I think you kind of know if you like the idea of that redesign or not. I played a lot of Super Mario 64 as well. Again, another game I know very well. I don't know Sin and Punishment all that well, but I did play it for a little bit. That is such a cool game. This is... I've said this before in the past, and this is kind of the proof of it. If Nintendo ever did an N64 classic, 100% guaranteed Sin and Punishment English translated version would be on it. But since they've released it here now, and I think they did on the Wii as well, it seems logical, if they ever actually get around to it, they're going to have to add some other exclusive experiences. Anyway, and then of course I wanted to test the Rumble, because that's like the biggest thing about this that's different from some of the other Switch compatible Retro Fighters controllers they've released in the past. This one has like very accurate rumble for the N64 mode specifically. So logically so, I played Star Fox 64 to test that, and that seemed to work just fine. I initially, I had to get kind of used to the controller again, but it wasn't so much the controller, it was just kind of the way, you're emulating it on the Switch. So there's, it's like, it's constantly prompting you with messages about go into suspend mode or not. And, that kind of stuff that just, once you get past the initial bugs and you get used to the controls, and when I say bugs, I just mean like, things I'm not used to. Once you get past all that stuff, which only takes a couple of minutes of gameplay, then you're good to go. I would think you already know whether or not this is the type of controller you're actually going to want. So build quality wise, it's Retro Fighters. They do a good job on stuff. If you like their stuff in the past and you specifically want the N64, Switch compatibility stuff, that online mode, if you want that, this is a good controller for that. I have not used Nintendo's official one, but I imagine it's just kind of the same thing. Do you prefer the original OG mold in your hand, or do you want a more modern ergonomic controller? this is going to be a good option for you. So I think that's, honestly, I think that's really about it. If you're interested in getting it, there will be a link in the description to Retro Fighters. Feel free to check them out. Also, again, put a link in the description to Gary's channel, as well as my other channel that I was talking about earlier, the travel channel. Please support that. I appreciate that. Social media stuff's all down there, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord. Please support me and follow me on all those things. I appreciate that. So like, comment, subscribe, and of course, I will see you all later.